Hi, everyone. Have a tough job today to merge between psychology and landscape design. So let's see how it goes. All right. So I'm going to be discussing today landscape, mental health and landscape, and see how we can collaborate more and more. Some interesting facts from the World Health Organization is that sorry, can we skip? Thank you. Okay, some interesting fact coming from the World Health Organization is that 1 in 8 people worldwide live with a mental health disorder. That's almost 15% of the global population. Anxiety disorder affects around 275 million people worldwide, making them the most prevalent mental health condition after depression. Depression is 280 million people. And more than 75% of people with severe mental health disorders like psychosis receive no treatment at all globally. So, these facts clearly show the global scale of mental health issues and the gaps in care and support systems. What is mental health? So basically, our mental health refers to our emotional state, which is our ability to experience and regulate a full range of emotions like happiness, sadness, and anger in a way that is appropriate to our life circumstances. It's also psychological, where it refers to our cognitive functioning, our decision-making, our thought patterns, and our ability to adapt to change and cope with challenges in our day-to-day life. And it's also social well-being, and it is reflected in our relationships and also social interactions. So as we navigate daily life, manage stress, and relate to others, it influences how we think, feel, and act, and it affects our decision-making and our day-to-day technically. Mental health is essential at every stage, from childhood to adolescence and adulthood. And you might ask, what influences our mental health? Where it's a complex interplay between biological, psychological, and environmental factors. And I stress on the environmental here that we're going to focus on. What is landscape? I'm talking to a full audience of landscape architects and urban planners, but okay. So the study of landscape is also known as landscape architecture. And basically, the landscape architects wants to build environments that are functional, sustainable, aesthetically pleasing, and beneficial to human well-being. And the domain of landscape also combines elements from several disciplines, including art, psychology, sociology, history, and geography. So the aim is to create spaces that meet human needs and well-being while respecting the natural environment, correct? So you guys have a lot to do. These are the key aspects of landscape architecture. What we're going to focus on today is the human well-being aspect. So far, all the talks and the coming ones have focused on all the other aspects. Me and my previous colleague focused on the human well-being side. So, can we skip this? All right. So, there's a saying that people say, when you want to relax, take a walk and enjoy nature. Okay. So, how are we to understand this connection? It might be true that walking through the surrounding landscape has a restorative effect on health. But what do we make from the existing studies and literature reviews on that topic? They're very scarce, by the way, and they're very little. So trying to find evidence-based studies on mental health and landscape was somewhat challenging. And if there's truly a connection between nature and human health, how do we foster the collaboration between both? And so to address these challenges, collaboration is essential. And the first talk starting this conference was about collaboration. So this is up. Now my talk will start. Can we skip this? All right. So the connection between nature and human health has deep historical roots dating back to 1000 BC. If we look at Egyptian and Indian civilizations, they recognize the healing properties of nature and cultivated medicinal gardens. If we move to the Middle Ages, also hospitals and monasteries provided patients with nature's calming effects. However, with the modern medical paradigm focusing so much on technological advancements and pharmaceuticals, it is leading to a neglect of the psychological and social health benefits of nature. However, it's very important to understand that concept of health is evolving, and when we talk about health, it's no longer about physical only. It's also about mental and social well-being. All right, so there's an evolving trend in landscape architecture where designers are considering psychological well-being and social inclusivity as central aspect of outdoor spaces. So what is green space? It's an umbrella term used to describe either maintained or unmaintained environmental areas. It's an area filled with grass, trees, and plants, usually in cities and towns. That's okay. But this shift, what does it say between, why are architects now including psychological well-being and inclusivity as part of their work? Why is it happening now? So the shift reflects a recognition that landscapes and green spaces play an essential role in fostering mental health and community inclusivity, and more organizations are there in order to help that. So the Therapeutic Landscape Network, the TLN, is an international organization that provides resources on design of green spaces that actually benefit health and well-being. So when designers are creating these spaces, they are resorting to how can we create them in a way that benefits human well-being. Why is that? If we look at some of the studies in the literature, please. Okay, so when living in urban areas with more green space compared with less green space, individuals have less mental distress, less anxiety and depression, and greater well-being. Also healthier cortisol profile. Cortisol is a hormone that helps the body manage stress. And that's all coming from living in an urban area with more green space. If we also look at residents of very green versus less green settings, the prevalence of having disease is way less in residents with very green areas compared to less green areas. And the quantity of nearby green space reduces life stresses overall, and this has been demonstrated in an adult population from the Netherlands and in a childhood population from rural upstate New York. So when it was done in both situations, it showed that the quantity of green space reduces actually life stressors. And a study has shown that healthier individuals tend to move to or stay in greener neighborhoods. And individuals who move house from a less green to a greener area have been found to show significantly better mental health. And when they studied them 3 years after they had moved, the results stayed the same. They were still very much on the quality of life scale, they were still very much on the positive side. So these research findings suggest that the individual desire with contact is not just the result of a romanticized view of nature, but it also really has an impact on the psychological well-being. And it's an adaptive process which appears to affect functioning and overall well-being. And this is why people are aiming more and more for green spaces. Also, there's a study that was done. If participants underwent a 90-minute walk, they were less likely to have negative patches. Can we please move one more slide? Okay. And another study was done that people living closer to trees in urban neighborhoods were less likely to use antidepressants. Also, gardening boosts dopamine. Dopamine is the pleasure neurotransmitter. So the more gardening they did, the better they felt. And people who use the natural environment for physical activity at least once per week have about half the risk of poor mental health compared with those who did not. And adding one every week reduces the risk of poor mental health by a further 6%. So, I mean, it goes without saying to show you the effect of green space on mental health overall. A study done by Markovich in 2017, it explores the mechanisms and how green space affects the different aspects of humans overall. So when it comes to physical activity, access to green space encourages outdoor exercise. When it comes to mental health, green space has been shown to reduce stress, anxiety, and depression. When it comes to social interactions, public green spaces serve as community hubs and they reduce isolation. And when it comes to environmental quality, green space can improve air quality and provide cooler microclimates. If we look at this overall graph, it all boils down to the mental health again, because when you're more outdoors, when you're exercising, this shows that you have better mood. When you're less isolated, this shows that you have better social life and relationships. And when you're in a better environment overall, it also affects your psychological well-being. Can we move? Thank you. So green space are often used in a targeted way also to deliver structured therapeutic intervention for vulnerable groups. So it's not only general and not only for anxiety and depression, but it's also, green space have been also seen to be very effective with youth at risk who have behavioral problems. Individuals living with dementia. Dementia is a disorder where people start forgetting. It's mostly in the elderly stage, but people can start before. It has been shown to be effective with autism, mental health disorders, as we discussed, and stressed employees. So having more green space actually benefits employees as well. Can you move forward? In our therapy as well in clinic, we also tend to use, these are some of the therapeutic interventions using green space for mental health. So that's true, we use our own clinical interventions and therapeutic interventions, but these are some interventions like wilderness therapy is a type of therapeutic treatment that uses outdoor adventure activities in natural environments to help individuals. Care farming is a therapeutic approach that uses farming and agricultural activities to improve the well-being of individuals. And animal-assisted interventions use pets and horses along with our own interventions in the clinic in order to improve mental health as well. So as you can see, we can use these as adjunct to our own interventions in clinic, or they can be used on their own. So therapy can be done in the outdoors, and it has been proven to be effective. Next, please. An interesting aspect here is cognitive psychology, and how do both relate? So the experience of landscape is technically holistic. It involves the flow of experiential qualities, images, thoughts, and meanings. And next, please. I wanted to talk here very briefly about mental cognitive maps. Why is that? A cognitive map is like a mental picture or a blueprint your brain creates to help you understand and navigate spaces. So in urban architecture, it's how you remember the layout of a city. So for example, when you're in a new city, landmark like a tall building or a sculpture or even a cafe help you build a cognitive map. And this map is updated as we move regularly and as we see the place more and more. So over time, your map gets more detailed as you remember routes, neighborhoods connect, and where your favorite spots are. But also, when you're in a city or when you're in a space, I, as a psychologist, ask the patient, how did you feel when you were there? What did you feel? How did you relate to the place? So it's not only about the architecture, it's also about the emotions. So if we look at the graph over here, that's true, we have a visual character of a place, and that's to see. But to perceive, you add to see, but also the site and the composition and the landscape features. Adding a third layer to that would be to see the composition, but also the memories, the emotions, and the understanding of a place. If we take the example of a person who had a panic attack, an anxiety attack, the first thing we ask in clinic is that, where were you? What did you feel? So I had a patient once who went to a park and he had a panic attack. And I asked him, what happened? It seems like he sat on a bench, and a couple of months back, he had sat on a bench with his own father, and his father had a stroke. Not the same bench, but on a bench in a park. So he had a panic attack then and there. It triggered his anxiety. So we talked about the place, he remembered certain aspects, he remembered the bench, the trees. So in therapy, we do ask about the landscape. We do ask, how did the person feel when they were in a certain place and in the environment? So a mental cognitive map is very important. So landscape architects maybe see the place as a landscape, but psychologists do see it more from a mental cognitive map that is getting updated regularly. And we use that in our therapy. And we add the emotions, the memories, and understanding of a place in order to understand the patient's psychological state. Excuse. So therapeutic gardens. Healing gardens for hospitals. Next, please. This is the case one we're going to talk about gardens. An increasing number of hospitals are integrating gardens as the tool to improve health in their developments. These gardens possess natural qualities and that can reduce stress. They can provide distractions for patients in a hospital. They can enhance well-being and increase productivity. So the healing gardens can improve the health of patients, the family, and the staff and the doctor, for not only for the patients themselves. There has been a study by Markets and Barnes that was done who showed that patients who have access to a nature experience in the hospital have positive change in their mood, tend to have shorter hospital stays, reduced medical requirements, and decreased feeling of isolation. So yes, gardens are very important when it comes to designing hospitals. There are two types of healing gardens in patient care, restorative and enabling. We usually see in hospitals the restorative aspect. Why? Because they can have a passive effect on overall health. You go to a hospital, you see the garden, you see the greenery, you pass through it. You gain its benefits simply by walking or sitting in it, and you can even begin to feel relaxed and refreshed by viewing the garden. Next, please. However, this is restorative, it's more general. The enabling gardens are more targeted. It allows the visitors to actively participate in gardening, and it allows patients to get fresh air, spend more time in outdoors. The enabling gardens are less seen in hospitals, and they are more targeted to certain populations, which I'm going to discuss later on in my talk. For now, let's look at an example for a restorative garden. These are examples of outdoor spaces at hospitals. They range from a hospital in Florence, and in the USA, we see the Cedars-Sinai. I saw it, it's a very nice actually garden, Cedars-Sinai in the USA. The Chicago Lurie Children's Hospital, if you can see, I put an image of that at night because some of the children are advised not to step outside and not be in the fresh air. So they actually designed an indoor garden, as you can see, that is covered for the children to stay in. And the Miami Jackson Hospital is a healing garden in Florida as well. It has been crafted by craft, very well designed as a restorative garden. Next, please. All right. So I'm going to present a study by White and Zordi, and it was done in 2023, and they examined the psychological and physical benefits of integrating nature into hospital environments. And they provide evidence-based guidelines for designing healing gardens. What they did is that they took the example of Zhongnan Hospital in Wuhan, China, and they focused on it. So what they did is, due to COVID-19 back then, they had to send questionnaires to participants. And they received 418 valid responses. And these responses were analyzed to identify the most important features and activities for users and to inform the development of guidelines for the hospital's outdoor environment. The hospital had gardens, but they wanted to improve them. So in order for them to just work with the landscape architects, what they did is that they sent the questionnaires to patients, to staff, to visitors, in order to help them so that they can all work together in creating gardens, healing gardens that would benefit everyone, not only the patients. Next, please. This is an example of the questionnaire that was sent out. One of the questions was, how important is it for you to have a garden outside Zhongnan Hospital? 10 out of the 418 said not important, and 147 said very important. Do you want some rehabilitation projects to be carried outdoors? Rehabilitation are some of the activities and interventions that could be done indoors, but they suggested, how about we do them outdoors? Yes, 329 responses, no, 86 could be. And do you want a place to sit? They asked the respondents. 140 respondents said alone, and with one or two people, they received 246 answers. So based on the answers collected and the guideline received, next piece, these are some of the guidelines in order to create healing gardens. It's very important to make them accessible, so paths that can accommodate wheelchairs and benches, and walkways need to be made of a material that won't produce a glare, so that not to hurt the sight, and ensures that entrances and exits are accessible and easy for patients and visitors to find. Encourage exercise, so it's important to create continuous paths so that people can easily walk around and explore the entirety of the garden. Add greenery, plants, trees, flowers. Increase visibility, so patients could have use of the space so that they can see nature, especially patients who are not allowed to leave the departments due to their disorders. And landscape lighting to highlight some of the best features of the garden, mainly at night. And it's good to provide options so visitors can make their own choices in navigating the gardens. And you want to make sure that there are various seating areas all throughout. It's important also to add shade as well, so that when when visitors are walking around, they can have shade. Next, please. It's very important to create tranquility, so outdoor space should be quiet and peaceful and away from any conditioning units. We need to consider safety, so include emergency telephone in isolated areas. It's a pretty big hospital, so you might get to places that are far away from the actual buildings. So it's good to have telephones in case some emergency happens or in case a patient or a visitor needs assistance. Add a water feature. Something I did not talk about is that just like you have green space, you also have blue spaces. And blue spaces are more linked to waters, rivers, and lakes. And they also have their own benefits, which we're not going to go into. But for now, it's good to place a large water feature at the center of the garden that could also be like a central port or a meeting point in the healing garden. And maintain sustainability is important. Use solar power for lighting and design gardens to be easily maintained. So it's a pretty big slide. The purpose of it is to show the before and the designated master plan. I put in yellow the most important, some of the most important features here. As you can see, they added a vegetation area where patients can showcase what they planted. And they use more plants in order to reduce noise from the road. They added seating arrangement all throughout so that patients could sit alone or sit with other people or sit in groups and actually have interventions like group therapy outside the hospital. And there are different types of spaces, including open space, semi-space, and enclosed spaces. Also, they almost added 8 garden areas. We can see them all throughout over there. Several types of gardens: senior garden for older adults, community garden for surrounding residents, children's and family garden in front of the women's department, and a staff garden on the roof in order for the staff to enjoy themselves. And they also added a sensory garden for patients with autism. So the plan was to reserve all existing trees while incorporating more green elements such as additional trees and berries than for vegetation. Right. Very quickly, next please. Next please. Okay, so autism. The Autism Society defines, this is in a sensory garden, it's more on the enabling garden aspect. What is autism? The Autism Society defined it as a developmental disability that impairs social interaction, communication, and behavior. So people with autism, they interpret sensory processing differently. So anything they touch, feel, taste is very different from what we experience. It doesn't mean it's bad or anything, not at all, but it's different. And we need to cater to that. So early intervention is important for children with autism, and a sensory garden allows children to explore these senses differently and at their own time and pace. Next, please. So sensory gardens by nature offer a multisensory experience that can be tailored to the specific needs of individuals with autism. Next, please. All right. So these gardens are designed to engage the senses of sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste in ways that can support emotional, cognitive, and social development in individuals with autism. And by using different plants and materials, so it looks like a garden, but it has so much healing and therapeutic benefits. Next, please. So when we're designing a sensory garden for autism, when we look at sight, it's important to be creative with colors for visual stimulation, include signals for certain areas. So they might not see colors the way neurotypical people see them. So it's important to also put labels, it's important to put colors as much as possible so that patients with autism can go and experience them themselves. When it comes to sound, it's good to include water features in the sensory garden or grasses that make interesting sounds. Calming sounds also is advised. We can do so by putting wind chimes so that they can listen to the tunes as well. Smell include plants and materials that will release different smells. We can put stronger smells, stronger scents more than others so that the child could go and smell what they need. Taste may be a less obvious sense to use. However, there are edible plants. Not all sensory gardens honestly use the edible plants. And when we do, it's important to put a section stating that it's edible plants so that patients could go and taste the plants and know that they are actually edible. And touch can experiment with a variety of different textures. So it's important to put different plants with different textures as well. So a sensory garden should be divided into clear sections so the visual, tactile, and other sensory messages each area conveys remain clear and undistorted. Next, please. I'm almost at the end. This is an interesting study that was made. It's called Designing an Impactful Sensory Garden for Children and Youth with Autism. What's nice is that the authors are composed of a landscape architect, David Combe, and an OT, an occupational therapist, which is a must in a multidisciplinary team working with children with autism, and a person from the Autism Foundation. What the authors said when they created their own sensory arts garden, they said that the children found refuge in the garden spaces away. It increased their curiosity. Children have identified favorite spots within the garden and return daily to engage with these spaces, which my colleague before actually mentioned. The garden is now an established space for outdoor instruction. Children want to go out and learn outside. Even for high school children with autism, more on the older side, they can be found working independently on their laptops. And these gardens provide opportunity and choice for everyone to engage with nature on their own terms. All right, so how can we collaborate? We know what psychologists do. We know what landscape designers do. They both want to create restorative and therapeutic spaces which can create spaces that improve mental health and emotional health, reduce stress, and support cognitive functioning. Next, please. So working together actually helps design inclusive, accessible environments that cater to diverse population, including those with disabilities. And psychologists, that's true that they guide the inclusion of sensory features and therapeutic elements to make sure that spaces are not just physically accessible, but emotionally and cognitively supportive. Collaboration enables evidence-based design where psychological research on the effects of built environment informs the design process. So we collaborate in taking the research and putting it theoretically on the ground. And research-backed principles can be integrated into the designs as well. Last, how can we work with policymakers? So to integrate this collaboration into policy, governments and planning agencies can advocate for interdisciplinary approaches. They can incorporate psychological principles into the design standards. They can actually fund training programs and research programs and promote sustainable healing spaces in public infrastructure. And so by doing so, policies can ensure that built environments contribute to the physical, emotional, and social well-being of individual and communities, because experience is first and foremost psychological, not only based on science. Thank you.